Alechem. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Autumn Overton. I'm on the leadership team of Jewish Voice for Peace, Orange County, and I'm the co-founder of Rad Jews of Orange County and Long Beach, a 3-year-old community of non-Zionist and anti-Zionist Jews. It's a real honor to be able to come today and tell my story at Tapestry. I had the great pleasure of working with Pastor Kent Doss when he was here, and I've been a huge fan of Pastor Jason ever since he was back at the UU in Fullerton, and I'm in awe of his prophetic, justice-driven ministry. And I've had the greatest privilege of standing shoulder to shoulder with so many of your congregants here in the struggle against ICE and MAGA fascism. I'm so enamored of what Tapestry stands for. And while I'll be talking about some of my Jewish stuff today, if I was forced to define myself, I'd probably call myself a Jew-bulim, a Jew by birth with a foundation in Buddhism who feels closest to the divine when prostrating myself during Jummah prayers at a local mosque on Fridays. Ultimately, I'd probably be a Unitarian Universalist, but alas, I'm just not a morning person. Although I guess this morning I am a UU. So my sermon today is called Wrestling with Judaism, Zionism, and God. And I'm really grateful that Pastor Jason asked me to come speak. I know talking about Israel and Palestine can be a little controversial, but I know that at our UUs, if you really want to be controversial, then just read from the Bible. So hold on to your seats because I plan to do both. In fact, I'm going to tell 2 Bible stories. But don't worry, you're safe. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story as a lifelong anti-Zionist who spent the majority of my life in exile from Judaism, and how faith-rooted activists like the ones among you at Tapestry organized me back into being a Jew. So first off, I'm a Jew by default. My mom's a Jew, but other than that, I grew up with very little Jewish education. We were the kinds of secular Jews who celebrated a few nights of Hanukkah every year, and that was it. And that was fine by me. Honestly, while growing up, it really felt less like I was a Jew than I was not a Christian. I was just a little bit of an outsider who around Christmas time didn't have to draw reindeer or Santa Claus in art class, and I wasn't allowed to eat the same hot dogs as the other kids. To me, that was being Jewish. However, around the age of 12, when most observant Jews would be studying for their B'nai Mitzvah, my mother and I were sitting on the couch watching the first U.S. missiles flying into Kuwait for the first Gulf War, live on CNN. I must have expressed sadness at the deaths because the response was immediate. My mother, who's been an amazing mother, assaulted me, screaming in the most insane way ever, "We Jews have to kill those Arabs and Muslims before they kill us." She made clear that this was our main priority as Jews in the world, to follow this genocidal logic. With almost zero understanding of the history of Judaism, a voice arose in my heart and said, if that's what being a Jew is, then I'm not a Jew. No one ever corrected that genocidal definition of Jewishness for over 20 years, during which whenever I ran into other Jews and the issue of Palestine and Israel, I would hear the nicest people say the most racist, dehumanizing, anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian things you could imagine. It literally wasn't until my early 30s that someone ever presented me with any other definition of Judaism or ways of being Jewish. And so every morning since the age of 12, I've literally awakened in the morning expecting to turn on the TV and see atrocities exactly like the ones we're witnessing today in Gaza at the hands of fellow Jews. It's never been a question of whether such a genocide would happen, only when. October 7th and the weeks and months and years since has been no surprise. Honestly, the only surprise to me is that it took this long. And so only seeing anti-justice Christians and Jews around me in Atlanta, Georgia, growing up and into my 20s, I remained pretty anti-religion, and that felt fine to me. I also grew up a musician, and so jazz and improvisation became my religion. But a big shift happened in 2017. Trump had just ascended into office, and I woke up one morning to the news that a man in a nearby neighborhood in Los Angeles, Ramallo, had just been abducted by ICE while dropping off 2 of his 3 American-born daughters at school. Within a split second, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Boom. A voice roared in my head, "You're a Jew." It was the first time in my life I had ever truly felt like a Jew. I realized that in a proto-fascist society like ours, those in power don't care whether I think I'm a Jew or whether I believe in God. To them, a Jew will always be a Jew, and an immigrant will always be an immigrant. I saw flashes of my grandfather and his family being chased out of Poland and escaping to the US in the early 1930s. I realized Romulo and his family were my people, and I had to be there for them. I had to find out who was doing something about this. So I went to Facebook, and I scrolled, and I scrolled, and I scrolled, and I scrolled, no mention of it anywhere. Until finally I landed on something. A press conference with the family was about to happen in downtown LA, but it just so happened to be organized by these creepy religious people called Clue. I think some of those creepy religious folks are here today, actually. I now work for Clue, but at this time I still wanted nothing to do with religious people, still associating them with right-wing fundamentalist bigotry. I didn't want to go, but a voice in my heart said, "Get over yourself, Autumn. You have to be there for this family." So I went, I stood with the family, and I cried, and the religious folk there didn't try to convert me. Instead, they organized me and convinced me to stick around and join their fight. Within a month of showing up, things got really confusing for me, and then there I was, all of a sudden at an Episcopal church, being trained in nonviolent civil disobedience by a rabbi, and then the next day going and getting arrested with 40 other faith leaders outside the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles, crying my eyes out and singing black church liberation songs. As I was getting loaded in the paddy wagon, I didn't yet have a label for myself, but I knew at that point that I was a slice of the same spiritual pie as these other folks were cut from. After that, I started running into more activists from the Jewish left who were also deeply involved, who said they were there because their Judaism demanded it of them. I slowly began to learn about Jewish histories and texts rooted in justice, some of which you're hearing today, and channeling the oppression of my people into fighting for the liberation of others. I learned about the Z word, Zionism, founded in 1897, a political movement that was determined to build a Jewish ethno-state somewhere in the world. Aside from Israel, it was also considering places in Africa, Argentina, or China. I also learned about the Jewish Labor Bund, a huge socialist party that was also founded in 1897, that was avidly anti-Zionist and demanded to remain in Europe on land that they'd lived on for generations and generations. They detested the Zionists, and the Jewish Zionists detested them. It was around this time that I met a cantor and told him my story of exile from Judaism. He asked me, "Do you know the definition of the Hebrew word Israel?" It's from the story of Jacob as he's headed toward the promised land. He's accosted by God in the form of an angel, and they wrestle for 24 hours. Neither Jacob nor God win the wrestling match. And Jacob is henceforward renamed Israel, which literally means wrestling with God. And the cantor revealed to me, despite my telling myself that I wasn't a Jew and family members repeatedly telling me I wasn't a Jew or that I was a self-hating Jew or other obscenities, the whole time over the years I had in fact been a Jew and that I'd been wrestling with God the whole time. My heart burst open. It was the first time I'd ever heard the word Israel in a positive light. I felt so validated, and it was so extremely healing. It was also so infuriating. I felt so violated because it felt like I'd been gaslit into feeling like I wasn't welcome, that there was only one way of being Jewish, that it was full of dogmatism and violence, and that instead of worshiping a big, mean, bearded dude in the sky, that you had to worship a violent country on the other side of the globe. So much had been kept from me, and truths manipulated and stories kept from me. I felt determined and inspired. My Jewish education accelerated. In fact, a couple months after October 7th, a rabbi that I'd always had an activist crush on convinced me to finally do my B'nai Mitzvah. This was 2 years ago. It involved learning some basic biblical Hebrew and learning how to interpret biblical stories instead of just taking them literally. We looked at the Talmud, a vast collection of these interpretations, also containing arguments galore. We call it midrash or drashing. Months into the B'nai Mitzvah, we were somewhat randomly assigned passages from the Bible. I was given mine, and it was about the story of the Israelites just about to complete their 40 years wandering the desert, and they go up a mountain and finally see the promised land for the first time, and then moments later begin their descent into it. And my heart sunk. I was absolutely crushed. Here's the passage from Deuteronomy. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to assign to you, great and flourishing cities that you did not build, houses full of all good things that you did not fill, hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, and you eat your fill. Take heed that you do not forget the Lord who freed you from the land of Egypt and the house of bondage. Revere only the Lord your God and worship him alone, and swear only by his name. It felt like one big, disgusting joke, a nightmare come true. At the same time as this 8-month rite of passage, I'd also been fighting side by side with local Palestinians and other Jews of conscience, calling for a ceasefire, calling for elected leaders to stop sending bombs to Israel, calling for peace, trying to explain to everyone about the genocide we all knew was happening, meanwhile being called traitors and anti-Semitic and that we were siding with terrorists, with friends being doxxed and gassed and assaulted and arrested on campuses. And then here I am assigned a text where God had just ethnically cleansed everyone who had lived in the Holy Land in order to make space for the Israelites to move in. The passage reads like a genocidal game show. God points to the cities in the distance and says, "Ooh, you're going to love this. You've just won the promised land. I've just evicted everyone who was living there just to make room for you. You're welcome. You get houses full of goods, free stuff, olive orchards, vineyards, lots of fresh water, all things you didn't make and possibly don't deserve. And now it's all yours. Mazel tov." And God tops it off by telling us, "You must now forever fear me." Yuck. I felt nauseous. In a couple of weeks, I was expected to go in front of a large crowd of Jews and read this in Hebrew as a celebration of my Jewishness in the middle of a raging genocide. The unbridled manifest destiny of these verses were gutting. But something wouldn't let me push this text away. Over those 8 months, I had learned it's our duty as Jews to dig deeper, to move through our discomfort, to attempt to interpret these texts at a different poetic, non-literal levels. And it began to feel like these lines had chosen me. And finally, something clicked and my heart shifted. Here's why. With my B'nai Mitzvah, I was doing something I thought I'd never do. I was born a Jew, but was never taught anything else other than unbridled hatred for Arabs and Palestinians. I'd been despised by many on the Jewish side of my family, and in the last 3 years, I'd been disowned and verbally castigated by 2 rabbi mentors for calling for a ceasefire. One of them had also previously doxxed me and reported me to the Anti-Defamation League for speaking up for Palestinian friends in the year before October 7th. At the same time, I also met a Palestinian woman here in Orange County who had lost over 50, not 15, 50 of their family members in the ongoing genocide, the majority women, children, and elderly. But during this time, I'd also found my own Jewish family. I'm part of a flourishing present-day movement of Jewish voices calling for peace, highlighting ancient Jewish values and texts that demanded We fight injustice that denounced all forms of war and violence and was calling for radical, inclusive love. I found histories upon histories of Jewish ancestors who felt the same way that I do. I hadn't even gone beyond the tip of the iceberg. There was so much to learn and waves of Jews to meet, from college-age young students to elders, like our friend Marjorie here. In fact, it felt like I finally arrived at a cliff overlooking a vast, rich, promised land filled with good things. Aqueducts flowing with the pure, fresh waters of Jewish thought, prayers, and stories. Homes where with every Shabbat, Jews had stubbornly sat at their dinner tables, refusing to work and renewing their weekly vow to resist their oppression and to never assimilate, and to stand their ground and demand dignity wherever they lived throughout the world. These Jews left us the sweet and sour fruits of their hopes and pains and persistence. They left us with dreams of socialism and societies that treat everyone fairly, inspiring stories of Jewish union organizers fighting to unite workers of every color and every race and every religion against greedy, exploitative bosses. I am in awe of what our ancestors left behind for us, and I am proud to move into this kind of promised land and to step into the roles they played in fighting for freedom. And whether in regard to the Holocaust or the pogroms of Eastern Europe or the torture and purges of Jews and Muslims in the Spanish Inquisition or the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem at the hands of Romans, I can hear these ancestors demanding in unison, never again for anyone. My ancestors have promised to me not a physical land, but a way of being, a way of dreaming, a way of rejecting violence, and the commitment to unbreakable, nonviolent resistance. And instead of finding and fearing a big God in the sky, the divinity I feel is an ever-flowing electric love that flows between us horizontally. Whenever we all come together across difference, holding hands and squeezing them, and join in sacred solidarity against oppression and for liberation, I can feel it. It is a divine, ever-increasing flow of humility and gratitude. Every day before I walk out the door, I throw on my yarmulke and wonder to myself, what does it mean to be a Jew in the world today? How am I going to prove to someone today that a Jew is on their side and ready to join in their struggle? How, in a time of rising anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and racism and transphobia and sexism, am I going to prove that I reject the conflation of my Judaism with the political movement of Zionism that Israel uses to justify the murder of so many innocent people? And instead that my tradition says that an injury to one is an injury to all. How am I going to prove today that it's not walls and armies and bombs and limiting free speech and deporting activists that's going to keep me safe, but instead that solidarity with others is the key to safety? I've learned from my ancestors that it's not just to hope for peace or to pray for peace, but to demand peace, a real peace for everyone, today, tomorrow, and a struggle that will likely last forever. Over 80,000 beautiful Palestinian souls have been wiped from the earth in the last 2.5 years at the hands of a fascist Israeli government. People of Lebanon have been relentlessly slaughtered, and 200 young girls in Iran and so many others erased. The madness has to stop, and we need everybody to join in the fight to stop this genocide and ethnic cleansing that is nowhere near ending. Ceasefire now, never again for anybody. May the memory of the righteous be for a blessing and for a revolution. It's such an immense privilege to be here today with you. Please feel free to stick around today and join the conversation after our service. And please let me know if you'd like to join our movement for peace. Shukran. Thank you.